Yo, what's going on everyone? So recently just made a painting of Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2 and I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out, and I just wanted to come on here today and make a quick video talking about how I sort of achieved this final result and this painting and some of the process and thoughts that went behind making this final image. So yeah, let's get into it now. So the first thing that I did was I wanted to sort of come up with a concept or like an idea of what I wanted the final image to look like. So the main thing that I had in mind was sort of like the first interaction that you see in the game, well, the first main interaction between James and Pyramid Head, where he's kind of surrounded by these dead mannequins that are kind of like scattered about on the floor and these weird torture cage things. I don't really know what exactly they are, but they look kind of cool. So that's kind of like the concept that I had in mind for this painting. Now, I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to include James in the final painting because I was finding it a bit hard when I was doing some of the thumbnails and the sketches, trying to figure out how to include both of them in the image, because they were kind of competing for like the focal point and stuff, and it was getting a little bit distracting and a bit confusing on how I was gonna sort of paint it and stuff. So I kind of just scrapped the whole idea of keeping James in the painting and focused more on Pyramid Head himself.
Please, Pete, I need this!
So that's kind of like the concept and the idea behind this final result, basically. So once that's done, then what I did was I needed to go and get some reference because, I don't know what the fuck this guy looks like. I know he's got a massive triangular helmet, but, I don't know the details of like his costume and all of that stuff. So what I actually did was, instead of getting my reference directly from like the usual places, like Pinterest or Google Images or whatever, I actually went onto YouTube first and I got some screen captures of the gameplay footage of the boss fight between James and Pyramid Head. Well, the first boss fight that is. And the main things I was actually looking for was kind of like the mood and sort of like the lighting and the atmosphere. And the other things was kind of like his pose, because his pose is quite interesting. He kind of like wields this really big executioner blade around and he kind of drags it behind him, and his head's always sort of like down, like he's got like a really hunched pose, kind of like this here. And that's kind of like the main things I was paying attention to. So a few of the things that I was paying attention to was like the scale of things. So how big actually is this helmet that he wears on his head, and like how big is he compared to like these cages and these tables and sort of like these torture instruments and everything that's in the room. So those are a few main things. Once I got the gameplay footage captures, then afterwards I kind of just got like the generic reference of whatever it was that I needed. So like just some like close-ups of his pose or like his clothing and the textures and stuff like that. Some hand references for like him wielding the blade, and also like just some references for like any materials like the wooden crates or those torture cage things, whatever the hell they are. Okay, so once I got the references down, then what I actually did was I went into Blender and I just kind of composed a generic scene of like some of the objects and the instruments that are in the painting. The problem is the reason why I used Blender was a lot of these sort of like hard surface objects, these cages, like they're very hard to paint manually and like to make selections and stuff in Photoshop. So I thought it'd be easy to just sort of generally make it in Blender first and then kind of like just render it out and take it into Photoshop. So I kind of just set up a camera, create a few assets, which is like these cages and like these tables and crates and stuff, and then duplicated them, kind of created the scene or like a similar result of the final image. And then once that's done, I just exported and rendered it out, moved into Photoshop, and that's where I kind of began with the whole sketch phase, which I'll show you guys now. Alright, so here we've got the sketch, we've got the sketch layer, and this is just that render from Blender, that rhymes. So this is just that render I've taken into Photoshop, desaturated it, made a line art out of it, and then I added the characters themselves. And once I added the characters, then I just created these quick masks, and here's me just toggling it on and off, and so I get a nice clean line work with those masks enabled. Once I was happy with the line drawing, then I just sort of moved over to creating a grayscale. Now I'll show you guys how I actually did the grayscale. I'll include a time-lapse footage at the end of me just making the painting and stuff. But yeah, main thing I was focusing on was just sort of like the lighting. So I just wanted a simple top-down lighting view. So obviously any parts of the characters or like the objects that are facing upwards, those are going to be the brightest, and then anything else facing downwards or towards the side, those would be slightly darker and in shadow. For this painting, I wanted there to just be one single light source, no secondary light sources or barely any bounce or ambient light, because I really wanted to sell that really dark, gritty vibe. So it was just a very simple top-down light hitting the characters, and you know, everything else is just going to kind of disappear into the background. So I know this looks like a very quick jump from the grayscale to like almost the final painting. Basically all I did was I just used a combination of like blending modes and like adjustment layers and stuff just to kind of get some color into the painting. The good thing about grayscale is, you know, you can see your values first before you kind of commit to the painting, so you get a good sense or a good idea of whether the painting is actually going to look good in the end. And I know some people don't really like using grayscale to color because the colors that they get don't tend to look that good, but I think that's just kind of like a skill issue, to be honest, because I know these aren't really saturated colors, but I think the colors look pretty decent, kind of gets the job done. Obviously not the most colorful image, but you know, it gets the job done. It looks decent, I would say. So yeah, I kind of just went from grayscale, took it into color, and then taking a look at the final thing, the main thing that I added was some of the more details on his arm, because if you take a look at the reference, let me just pull it up 1 second. So taking a look at the reference, he's kind of got like this weird, I don't know what that is, that just looks like fucking, it might be dried blood or something like that. So that's kind of like some things that I wanted to add, these kind of textures or like these bruises or marks or whatever it is, and some details on like the helmet and the blade and stuff. So that's kind of what this layer was. It was kind of like a final layer, just adding some blood and some textures and brushwork in. Let me actually show you guys another thing as well. So how did I actually paint this stuff? Like how does it look so crisp and, you know, like very sharp and stuff? How did we actually do that? So in Blender, what you have is, let me just get rid of these 2 seconds. Yeah. So in Blender, when you're working in the viewport, you can render out something called a clown pass. I know that sounds very strange, but that's actually what most people refer to it as. It's called a clown pass. And when you take it into Photoshop, what you can actually do is you can take something like the magic wand tool, and you can sort of like select it, because everything is a similar color. You can select it all together, and then what you can do is that just sort of like allows you to paint inside of those lines, and you don't have to worry. Like you can make like clipping masks or layer masks or do whatever you need to do, and that's the really good thing about sort of doing these things in Blender, is like you get to sort of visualize the final result quicker, and you can make a clown pass, and that just helps you keep that really clean artwork inside of those lines. So that's how I painted these boxes basically. So I'll show you guys now, 1 second. Like that was before, that was when I converted it from grayscale to color, and then I created a selection of this palette, for example, and then that's the final thing. So I know it's a very tedious process, but all I was basically doing was I was just creating a load of these selections, and then once I made the selections, I was just sort of painting everything one by one. So like the palette here, I was painting the tables, the crates, the cages, all of that stuff. And then literally like the final layer here is just me sort of using like the liquify tool to like adjust the pose or some proportions a little bit, and just some very, very minor like color adjustments and like value adjustments. Now, yeah, again, unfortunately I've made it way too fucking dark, like so dark it's very hard to see and very hard to pick up. I don't know if you guys can even pick up some of the details, probably depending on what kind of screen you're watching this from. But yeah, I think I've made it a little bit too dark. I think in the future, if I do make any of these horror style paintings, then I'll probably just amp the brightness up just a tiny bit, so people can at least see whatever the fuck it was I was trying to paint. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It was kind of like a straightforward linear process. I don't always do my paintings like this. Sometimes I kind of just wing it. Sometimes they're more structured like this one. But that's kind of the process that went into making this final result. And yeah, that's about everything that I wanted to kind of discuss in this video. If you've got any questions about anything, like whatever it is, you know, like if you have any questions about this process, or if anything didn't make sense, just leave me a comment and I'll try my best to answer and explain what exactly it is that I tried to do. And what I'm going to do now is I'll probably just play like a 10 or 15 minute time lapse of me actually doing this painting from start to finish, and hopefully that should sort of clear anything up. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you very soon in the next one. Thanks.